Hi, welcome all. I'm honored to moderate this discussion about Houston's role in innovation in the global technology ecosystem, especially related to energy transition. A quick setup here, at the risk of being a little bit aggressive. I remember exactly 3 years ago to the month, January 2018, the hottest contest in the land was to be named Amazon's new HQ2, the second headquarters. Houston was a strong and proud contestant there, and the short list came out 3 years ago of 20 companies, sorry, 20 cities, two of which in Houston, 20 cities, two of which in Texas, and none of them Houston. And that was quite a WTF moment for the city here, given how much strength there is in technology, innovation, and infrastructure. So I think that sets the stage very well for how much work the city has done in attracting world-class talent, and including a number of the people here in today's panel. From my own perspective at Blue Bear Capital, we're proud to be invested in a number of companies based in Houston, companies like GoExpedi and Voyager and Mission Secure, and many others who can and should engage with a lot of the stakeholders in town here. But this is really a world-class group of panelists, and would love to just make a short set of introductions, and especially thank the team with Sandy, Guillermo, Megan, and Elise for connecting us all together today. So I'll start just going around the horn for everybody to give their quick hello with Juliana.
Thank you, Ernest. Really glad to be here. So I'm Juliana Garaiser. I'm the Greentown Labs launch director for Houston. And Greentown Labs is the biggest incubator in clean tech, climate tech in America. And we're doing our first ever expansion to Houston. So we announced that we were coming to Houston in June. We already have selected a location at the Innovation District, very close to the Ion at the All Fiesta Supermarket. We're doing our grand opening on Earth Day, April 22nd this year, and we already have 17 startups that are starting virtually with us.
Thanks. Over to Scott.
Hello, everyone. Scott Gale. I'm the executive director here at Halliburton Labs. Halliburton Labs is sort of nearest akin to a startup accelerator. We just launched summer of last year. We like to think of ourselves as a scalerator. Our mission is to advance cleaner, affordable energy, and we're looking for companies that are in that seed to Series A range that are preparing for scale, and we provide them access to Halliburton's facilities, our people, our broader business Rolodex to help them take their technologies to scale. And so we're excited to have our cohort 0 up and running. We'll be announcing our official cohort 1 here in a couple of weeks, and anticipate hosting somewhere between 12 and 15 companies a year. So excited to be here.
Thanks, Scott. Moji?
Hi, everybody. I'm Moji, co-founder of Cevita. We're a biotech and energy startup based in Houston in J Labs. We engineer microbes to eat CO2 from flue gas and produce valuable chemicals, and happy to be here and contribute to the discussion for energy transition and Houston's role.
Thanks, Moji. And Luis?
Luis Alcocer, it's a pleasure to be here. I work for Chevron Technology Ventures, where I manage our Future Energy Fund. It was launched in 2018. It's a $100 million fund focused on industrial decarbonization, transportation, and power as well. CTV's been around 21 years or so. We focus on mostly Series A through C, but we also have a C program, and I'm really excited to discuss the future of investment with you guys.
Great, thanks, Luis. So let's start off with a general question, touching on the intro up top. What unfair advantages do you think being in Houston gives you and the companies you support? And I'd like to direct this in particular to two people, though anyone's welcome to jump in. Scott, representing Halliburton, really is sort of an anchor tenant in the community here, a big center of gravity, been in town for a long time. And then also Juliana as a newer member, and maybe correcting Jeff Bezos' oversight from a few years ago, having scoured the country and chosen Houston.
Sure. Thank you, Ernst. You're right. Halliburton's global headquarters is here in Houston, and we operate in a number of different countries around the world, and really consider Houston to be a critical part of our success as an organization. And Halliburton Labs having kind of our anchor here is super important. And when you think about kind of the unfair advantage that Houston has, they really have the advantage of being the big incumbent in energy. When you think about the talent that is here in the city, every engineering discipline is represented, every science discipline is represented. And so it really is this great diverse place where we're looking at not only scientific and technology challenges, but engineering challenges. And the city just knows how to make things at a global scale that have a big, meaningful impact. And so I think that's certainly one aspect of it. And then when you look at the diversity of industry that's here that contributes to that, I think that there's so many factors that are sort of in place that I think really give Houston the kind of incumbent advantage that gives us a bit of kind of an unfair starting place as we go along. And I think we can debate and discuss the things that we need to make sure that we invest in and to be able to keep that advantage. But we're certainly starting out this energy transition in the pole position.
Definitely. So, Greentown Labs has been already in Boston for 9 years, and many of the companies we work with are actually headquartered in Houston. So, when we had our advisory boards in Boston, many of the advisory board members would say, like, we take decisions from Houston. Our headquarters, our big places are in Houston, and we would love to have a Greentown Labs in Houston. And you can tell that, now that we have an advisory board in Houston, it's at a higher level, that the commitment to energy transition is happening from our partners. And we really think at our advisory board like a little bit of a sounding board, and where the conversations in terms of leadership are going to happen for energy transition. And we really believe that we are very well positioned to lead the energy transition in Houston, but also in the world, because many of the representatives of our board are actually leading global companies. So we really think we have that unfair advantage. And also the fact that we're talking not only about diversity of skills, but diversity of people. We are the most diverse city in the US. And I think for innovation, that is key, to have very different opinions, diverse background, to be able to create innovation at those intersections. Not to forget the kind of assets we have, a lot of the assets that we have for oil and gas could be repurposed, like drilling could be used for carbon capture. Some of our oil rigs could be used for offshore wind. We have already pretty big infrastructure in hydrogen already in place. And the capital is also available here. Granted, a lot of it is for later stage companies, but we have quite a few examples of companies that are willing to engage at earlier levels to make sure that the ecosystem here starts taking shape.
Great, thanks both. And you've started to go into this already, Juliana, but I'd love to keep pushing on that exact thought. Does the oil and gas legacy of Houston really translate to leadership in the energy transition? And how can we actually implement that in real life beyond the narrative? And you're starting to do that with some of your companies, but would also love to hear their perspective from Luis, who's worked with some of the largest super majors on the planet and now leading their initiative for energy future investment, and Moji, who's on the front lines in managing and deploying some of that innovation himself.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if it directly translates to leadership in the energy transition, revolution, but I do think it positions you really, really well. There's a lot of existing skill sets, talent, assets, infrastructure, and even processes in place that I think give us a great advantage in building momentum as we go into the energy transition. If we think about Chevron Tech Ventures, some of the tools and processes we build to support, investment in the core business. If you think about the processes for accessing technology, for contract for piloting, for deployment scale, we're able to transition some of that into the energy transition space as well. So I do think we're really well positioned to leverage a lot of the existing advantages that we built over the past 50, 75 years.
And I agree with Luis. And just to add to that a little bit, I think, we talked about the infrastructure and we talked about the talent. We have those, but that's not enough to get to the leadership position. I think there's two more ingredients that we need. The first one is the will to want to be the leader in this space. And that's something we're seeing now, that leadership, the companies coming out and talking about this, right? But the second ingredient, I think, is the vision. And the vision to see what is Houston going to look like in 2050. We talk about net zero, but what about Houston? Can you envision driving down the ship channel and see, biorefineries who have been repurposed, or using CO2 as a feedstock, or creating emission-free, precursors to polymers and plastics? This is possible. A lot of times people make kind of short-term plans, next 3 years, 5 years. But if we think about the next 20 years, next 30 years, there's nothing that we cannot do. And there's a lot of precedence for going after big, large kind of moonshot projects in Houston. And this is no different for energy transition. One more unfair advantage that I wanted to add, Ernst, that we talked about, was that here we're talking about energy transition and of course the legacy of oil and gas, but we have two more huge industries right here in Houston. One is the medical center. We have the largest medical center in the world, biotechnology, and a lot of the technology that is coming to bear for energy transition has its roots in synthetic biology, such as what Cevita is doing. And we have J Labs, who could also have that kind of translation of what we already have into that area. And then the second is the NASA. We have the Johnson Space Center. You may know already that CO2 is a valuable resource in space that astronauts breathe out. On Mars, 96% of the air is CO2. So both NASA, SpaceX, other companies already have a lot of plans for using that CO2 as a feedstock for processes. There is nothing, literally nothing, that could stop us from doing the same thing on Earth. It's just a matter of having the will to want to do so, and then apply all the talent and infrastructure that we have to build the future that we want.
That's great. A lot of great topics coming up there, Moji, that you raise, and we're very fortunate. One of our colleagues at Blue Bear, Tim Kopra, former NASA astronaut, was I think a big part of the Greentown Labs Houston courtship, and we're proud to have been able to bring a few more voices together. And that's just an example of the kind of connections that can only happen in Houston. So on that point, you mentioned moonshots. Juliana, maybe, or anybody, please jump in. When you look at leveraging this innovation ecosystem, what's more exciting to you or special to you about Houston? That ability to be really visionary and chase technology breakthroughs, or to use the enormous scale and existing infrastructure of Houston's oil and gas legacy or industrial base to make maybe smaller innovations, but that are deployed and distributed much more broadly and have an impact more immediately?
Well, I love the visionary part of Houston. We really take on the biggest challenges. And as Moji mentioned, the TMC trying to fight cancer and COVID, NASA, you're trying to aim for Mars, even bigger than moonshots. Now we have Mars shots. So that kind of spirit is the one that we always had there. But I think we've also had a lot of silos. Innovation was happening a lot in silos. There's a lot of competition going on where, the hospitals wouldn't collaborate, the oil and gas companies wouldn't collaborate. And the fact that convener places like TMC or like Greentown Labs or Halliburton Labs are showing up is where these silos can be broken. And, we can have real conversations about open innovation, and where, the investor community can meet, the corporate community can meet, the startups can meet the other SDOs, the universities that can bring the talent. And we can all have open conversations on how to do innovation across companies, across industries that can really lift Houston up. And And I think that's one of the things that when you talk to partners like Chevron or Shell, they said, like, we do a lot of internal research that we cannot even access as Shell employees, So having this open innovation discussion and be able to share some of the things that you've learned with other partners is some of the reasons why we have partners at Greentown, not only because they want to meet our companies and see whether they can work with them and have pilots or invest in them, but one of the other big reasons is like, let's talk to the other partners that have engaged, so that we can have a more multidisciplinary approach. And I think that's the beauty that, I think that we had most of the ingredients that are needed to create big innovation, but we haven't had the interactions. And sometimes, places also need to be created to make those interactions happen.
Maybe a quick comment, if I could, on that, because I think it's really important. Is the energy transition? It's incorporating a lot of discussion. There's a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of really kind of key important areas that we're focused on, but it's a long game, and there's a lot of things that we're solving for now that we actually maybe don't even have line of sight to the kinds of things that we're going to have to solve for in the future. And it's going to require hundreds, if not thousands, of different technological improvements to sort of usher in this future energy mosaic. And I think it's so important what Juliana's touching on is these collisions, and that connectivity with diverse thought and perspective is going to be a really important component of addressing those future challenges as they arrive, identifying those challenges more quickly, and then being certain that we're solving for the right thing. And it's oftentimes we get caught up in the technology and solving for kind of the cool thing, but then you also have to make sure that you can do it not only at the kilowatt scale, but at the gigawatt scale, and being able to bridge that chasm of technological advancement as well as commercial advancement, and being able to make all of that come together economically is just a really important thing that we have ahead of us. That we've got a lot of the right stuff in front of us today, but there's a lot of things that are coming that when they arrive, that connectivity is going to play such an important role in being able to address it quickly and economically.
Yeah, that's a great point you raised there on risk tolerance and timeline. So if I can throw that back at you, Scott, and maybe Lewis as well, one of the traditional cynical takes on corporate venture is that there's a lot of appetite in the good times, but then if there's an economic downturn or a couple investments go sideways, maybe even there's just a change in the board of directors or a new CFO shows up and budgets tighten. How do you build institutional resilience and longevity to match the timelines that some of these technologies and founders might have?
It's an important challenge. I'll make a couple of comments, and then, Luis, at least for us, for Halliburton Labs, we don't quite operate like a CVC in the sense that we're writing checks, but we think about it through the lens of to have sort of that longer term view is absolutely something that we have to think about and solve for. And I think it's just a willingness to say, we don't have to have line of sight to the outcome and the return, but it's a recognition that by contributing to the startup community and the entrepreneurial ecosystem more broadly, that value will find its way back. And that I think is one of those kind of key differences in sort of the corporate mentality and sort of the startup community mentality, is that line of sight to return. And so I really do think it's just a mentality and a willingness to contribute and have the patience. You really have to have kind of a 20-year outlook and a rolling 20-year outlook when you're talking about engaging with early stage companies. And I don't think there's sort of a silver bullet to solve the challenges that you've talked about, Ernst, but I do think that having that give first mentality and contributing and continuing to contribute, and a recognition that will pay back in some form or fashion, but you might not have direct line of sight to what that'll be in the moment that you're making that investment.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. I think what we've done, so we've been around 21 years. I think we're the longest running, continuously going VC firm. And I think one of the secret sauces that was built in early was to take a bit of a portfolio approach. So we do address both near-term business needs, but at the same time, we're also looking further down the road to what issues might be a challenge for us in the future as well. And being able to address both at the same time is a delicate balance, but it does show value kind of across the business timeline. Another piece is being open to kind of continuously evolve. So I think we look tremendously different now than we did, 21 years ago. Whether that's building new digital competency, now growing new, energy transition competency, building a new network with new co-investors, new partners. I think it's part of kind of a continual growth process. And as long as the team and the management is willing to be dynamic and flexible and continue to evolve, I think that's one of the secrets to kind of success in staying in the long game with this, as well as demonstrating the value and the consistency to the investment companies. So being able to demonstrate we're going to be there through good times, through bad times, we're going to do what we say when we're on the board. I think that builds a lot of the reputational side. So over time, we can co-invest over and over with some trusted partners.
That's great. Thank you. And let me change gears a little bit here for a moment. There's this thought emerging that I think most recently picked up from Mark LaCour and the Oil and Gas Network, that podcast series, which is one of many great local resources that's made its way around the world. But a thought that there's sort of a cultural trend, especially with millennials and Gen Z, that people may no longer be as excited to work in oil and gas or even legacy industrial markets. Wind turbines and solar farms and so on are pretty rigorous industrial environments. And there's likely to be a higher and higher concentration of foreign workers or international talent taking those roles, and that could be a good long-term opportunity for that profile. If I take that thought and just twist the knife even a little bit more, there's this trend, of course, that the homegrown American Ivy League educated kids have always wanted to go to Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, and now it's Facebook and Amazon and Google. One advantage Houston has always had in recent times is being the most diverse city in the United States. How do you see those competing factors playing off each other, and either in your day-to-day life or conceptually being an advantage or a challenge for Houston?
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah, please, Moji.
Because I'm a millennial, so I'm very fragile. So you have to let me go first, okay?
Give you a trophy at the end, Moji.
Not that I'm entitled, but I think I agree with that. There's a lot of millennials that are now in this kind of thought process of really wanting to be close to something that's impactful, that connects with them internally, that has good justification. And I think actually a lot of the momentum behind energy transition and climate tech and all that is also driven by millennials. So as someone who has worked in the industry, in oil and gas industry, as a petroleum engineer myself, I could tell you that there are a lot of other people like me who come from the industry, who have worked in Houston, who've been to the field, but they want a different future for the industry. And at the same time, their option number one is not to leave the industry. And sometimes it's not even to just go like to solar or wind. But I'm hearing a lot of my friends in different companies, they want to get into CCUS groups, new energy groups inside oil and gas companies. Those are like the hottest departments that everyone wants to get into, right? So that's like a very good starting point. So like oil companies, they have to really leverage that and like get more people to gain the skills for that transition, because that's what the future is, and a lot of those are going to be millennials. And then if you take a step back kind of in the chain, to have universities teach those things, like they should have a very full-blown schedule and agenda for CCUS, for teaching petroleum engineers also about energy. The same thing is happening with SPE. It's not anymore just about petroleum engineering. They're also teaching everyone about energy. Geothermal was mentioned. That's right there. That's like right up our alley. It's a lot of the same processes. And, to get people outside of that, just thinking about oil and gas and think more about energy, learn also not just about upstream, but also about downstream, integration of all this together. And a lot of that is what, millennials are going to make it happen. But we just need help from everybody else too, But I think if anything, that's a good thing, to really tap into this energy that millennials are bringing to the table.
Yeah, amen. And special shout out to Rice and University of Houston, Clear Lake, and others who've got really specific and strong, enduring programs to kind of corral talent and point towards those innovative areas. Anybody else like to pick up on that topic, including the generational and or the diversity components of Houston intersecting with the energy industry?
I can take that, and I think, Moji, the point you make about, traditionally oil and gas companies having those opportunities is key. And I remember Barbara Berger, who's on our advisory board, when I told her, that we could only get, our Boston board had said, like, we could only fundraise 50% of the money from oil and gas companies. Like Chevron, she said, like, we're not an oil and gas company, we are an energy company. And I think that distinction is happening across the board in Houston. And I know Chevron has already started, and Shell is in the middle of a full process where, they're totally shifting strategies. Same thing for BP, so I think there's an internal shift of what we have considered traditionally oil and gas companies that are becoming real energy companies, and that's really, really exciting. Regarding the diversity part, I think for the energy transition is more important than ever, because climate change impacts, underserved communities in a much more profound way, and they really need to be part of the solution. So, one of the things we're trying to do at Greentown Labs is, impact also the community we're going to. So we're trying to make sure they understand that the change is also involving them, and trying to make sure that they understand they are part of the building, not only the inside, and they can come anytime for training events. We're trying to make sure that, high schools and schools are aware of what's going on. At the end of the day, it's the future, and we want them to be part of this. But also the outside, we want to be very Houston-light and reflect what we're doing. So we're going to have murals there that represent what we want to do in Houston, as part of not only the energy transition, but also climate justice, which is really the thing to do. So at Greentown Labs, we are doing a very big effort on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are really championing that, not only internally and trying to hire more diverse people, but also recruit more diverse entrepreneurs. And for that, we are not only talking to the Ivy Leagues universities that we used to approach in Boston, the Harvard, the MITs, the LOL, but also more diverse, universities here, like Houston Community College, Lamar University, Prairie View, because we really believe that, without this diverse set of people, we're not going to get very far. And, we really think that Houston is very diverse, but the innovation community necessarily might not be as diverse, doesn't represent yet what Houston is, and we want to make a change in that too.
Ernst, can I make a quick comment sort of on this topic of kind of the energy industry attracting talent? Because I think it's super important. And I think one of the things that's sort of missing in the discussion around it, and I've had the opportunity to live in a lot of different places around the country, from Washington State to California to New Jersey and West Virginia and Michigan, et cetera. And I've had this discussion a lot because I am super passionate about just sort of energy and access to energy and sort of what that means. And I think what gets lost is that fighting for clean, affordable energy is like fighting for humanity. It's this super important ingredient to quality of life for humans on this planet. And we often lose track of sort of you call it the morality or the ethics of energy and all these sort of different conversations. And the reality is there's billions of people on the planet that do not have access to clean, affordable energy, and that they have a lower quality of life because of that. And that there really is a mission-driven opportunity that I think a lot of kind of the profile that you're describing maybe loses track of, and that oftentimes we have not done a good job as kind of the incumbent energy sector to sort of beat that drum and sort of raise awareness around the impact that energy access has to the quality of human life. And I just think that's really important. So I want to just make sure that we capture that point.
Yeah, no, that's a great one, and appreciate that. Exploring that a little bit further, then, there's this constant theme, especially in venture capital investing and in other forms of investing, where you're basically backing people, of what I call tongue-in-cheek founder worship, right? Everybody talks about how great the founder is, and they're just destined for success if they're successful, and if they're not, maybe that's not the one you talk about at cocktail parties. But what really makes startups soar as they get to increasing scale and impact is the entire team. And I think it's especially challenging after you've identified a great founder or founding team and put some capital behind it to support that scaling. And really where the rubber meets the road is in finding great software engineers, customer success managers, VP of people ops, accounting and treasury support. There's just so many skills and capabilities that need to come in. I'd love to hear how any of you see Houston as being a particularly rich market for that kind of talent, or if there are any bottlenecks or kinds of talent or development that can be improved.
Maybe I'll take the start there and say I think it's a good point on scaling and attracting talent. From our portfolio, we've seen a tremendous amount of talent here locally in Houston across the board. So from leadership to the digital side to marketing to finance, and a tremendous kind of support system here that can be leveraged at quite an affordable type of cost for a startup community. So we do think it's an attractive place for startups to be. But I do think that the paradigm might be changing with COVID and with some remote working and getting talent where there's hubs. I think it's an evolving space. So I think our companies are doing more to think about, can we access talent in other places? What might that bring to us? How might that adjust our growth trajectory? And the other piece which we're leveraging more is the network of the advisors and the board members for getting those talent. So for us, it's not about volume. How many programmers can we find in Houston, but can we find the right one, the specific talent that we need at the specific time? And so we try to leverage this network of co-investors and advisors within the company and our portfolio to find really that right person who's going to fit into that culture.
I won't ask about
that culture part is the one that brings me to the fact that sometimes you are very founder focused as an investor, but what really pervades is the culture that founder creates in the company, whether it's a culture of open innovation or openness, where if the founder misses at some point, that those values will still be there. So I think really good investors realize the difference between the founder and the culture they're creating, and are less founder focused and more culture focused. And I think here the fact that we can create a pretty open culture, diversity is a key advantage for our companies.
Yeah, that's great. And I won't ask the question around working digitally and does geography matter anymore, because I think after 9 months, we're all just sick of talking about that, and we can all put that conversation on autopilot if we had to. Rather, I'd get into some more concrete examples of how we're all bringing this to life. No pun intended. If carbon utilization and concrete happens to be your favorite, but if anyone has a company or two that you'd like to use to represent the kind of business that you're backing and building and how it relates to Houston, I think that would be really interesting for the broader audience to see in action.
Well, I could, one of the examples we're very proud of is a company called Applied Bioplastics that has plastic generation from all kinds of nature-based cellulose and many others, and is very innovative. And since they joined Greentown Labs, they've been able to present to people at Unilever, because they're a partner of ours in Boston. So very excited about innovation in all the material space, trying to break down plastics, as Moji is doing, and recycling that. The circularity part of the chemistry is really, really interesting to us. Another one that is very different and is more in the software scale is Clear Trace, and trying to make accounting work for carbon emissions and And I really believe that, incorporating, carbon to our financial models and stopping having carbon as an externality is the way to go. So I'm very excited about what ClearTrace can do. So those are the two examples from my side.
For those that have kind of tracked Halliburton Labs over the last several months, our first participant company, Nanotech Inc., is one that I think highlights a bit of our approach. And I don't want to preempt announcing the next couple of companies that'll be joining. We'll leave that to a press release here in a few weeks. But I think that's what's really for us that we're looking at are enabling technologies and the kinds of things that sort of help ensure that sort of the broader kind of big banner areas of carbon capture or hydrogen or even nuclear or other fuel sources, things in wind and solar that take place. And I think certainly as you look at kind of grid scale storage and other things, there's going to be a need to, for example, recycle some of these materials and find new ways to repurpose them. And so, had an opportunity to talk to a number of different kind of companies in the battery recycling area that I think is sort of a really interesting kind of niche space that's super important, where if you do the math on taking some of these technologies to scale, the amount of rare earth mining that's going to be required, we don't have enough of that. And so you're going to have to be able to repurpose some of those materials. And so I really get excited about the people that are kind of solving some of those challenges in the trenches that maybe we don't kind of think about or hear about, that are going to be important components as some of these big marquee kinds of technologies start really taking hold. The other one that is sort of these small nuclear reactors, I think are really interesting, that sort of help to kind of chip away and address what is one of the best energy sources we have on the planet from a energy density perspective, but comes with a bunch of baggage that we have to solve for, and maybe rethinking how some of that comes together. I think is going to be, for me, I just think is kind of a fascinating challenge, where you're retreading a lot of old territory, but thinking about it through a new lens, using new materials, new perspective, new designs. And I think that is what makes it such a dynamic, exciting space.
So on my end,
the only one oh, go ahead, Moji.
Sorry, yeah, but if I was to highlight one company, I could, invite everybody to notice the other part of the ecosystem, which are the big companies that are in this space, that are innovating, which sometimes they're not highlighted enough, I think. And at the end of the day, if we were to reverse climate change, we have to start with where it is that we have the highest emissions, right? And those are the same high carbon footprint companies, including oil and gas companies. So the one that I'm really impressed by and I follow closely is Oxy. And, they were an example of having the will and the vision. When Vicky Halep wanted to go in this direction, set the strategy, created a whole new company called Oxy Low Carbon Ventures for that purpose. And for those listening, if you want to check in oxylowcarbon.com, which is very different than a traditional kind of old company website. It's very fresh, and you could see all kind of projects that they're involved in. And I think that serves as a great example of how a traditional oil and gas company could reinvent themselves to start to engage in different parts of the energy ecosystem, but at the same time leverage the expertise and the infrastructure that they already have. And so I think that's a great example for people to see.
Go ahead, Luis, if you had another comment.
No, I think the only kind of areas that I was going to add that were of tremendous amount of interest to us as well, that weren't mentioned already, was also on the hydrogen side, which I think we see is really intriguing and a lot of exciting development going on. And in the future of transport, whether that's EVs or AVs or infrastructure, we see a tremendous amount of activity going on, and perhaps coming to some really exciting inflection points in the future. But agree with the other areas that folks mentioned.
So I think that's a really striking set of responses, and I don't know if it's even something that stands out to this panel, but to somebody who spends a lot of time, as I guess we all do in Silicon Valley, 4 out of 4 hard tech responses. Nobody mentioned AI or IoT or blockchain or enterprise software, and I'll have to fight for that corner a little bit because that is Blue Bear's focus. But I think it's remarkable the depth and breadth of opportunity there is, and I think that speaks to the advantages that Houston and its technical expertise have. And I'm I'm reminded of the JFK famous speech at Rice University. Why does Rice play Texas? Why do we choose to go to the moon? We do these things because they're hard. And the fact that you've got such a great constellation of talent, organizations, and missions here to do the hard things, in addition to, no doubt, a lot of great enterprise software development is exciting. So, and with maybe a bit of a wild card question or discussion, but a couple of the biggest themes that are emerging in these this stage of, maybe it's some part of a hype cycle. We don't know which part, but some part of energy transition. We looked recently, and there were, I believe, 15 energy and mobility focused SPACs launched in the last 6 to 9 months, and having already identified acquisition targets. Of those, over 10 are valued above $1 billion. Of those 10, I believe less than 2 or 3 have reported revenue over $5 million or so. So that's really striking. Then you also look at other innovations like AngelList and rolling funds and things CART is doing. So you've got like this New York finance world, and then you've got this West Coast Silicon Valley world of financial innovation and structuring innovation, whereas Houston typically has a reputation for just operations, execution, engineering. How would you like to see that evolve? Should Houston just keep doing the real blocking and tackling work, or should Houston do more to be creative at the risk of sometimes maybe going a couple steps farther than people are comfortable with?
I can start saying that, I've been very involved in the early stage investing side of things, and one of the things one of my members at the Houston Angel would say is like, we finance innovation, but we don't innovate in finance, and that's something that, I think we should start doing. I think there's a lot of merits, and I think clean tech and climate tech needs a lot of innovation in finance. And I think, we're seeing new models in financing this kind of innovation. At the same time, you wonder whether the SPACs are creating a bubble, like we had like the clean tech bubble that was kind of burst, and are we going to have a climate tech bubble? There's always the risk, but I think it also signals opportunity. So I think there's a big signaling in opportunity in this space, and I think people are reacting to that, and I think there's really something behind that bubble. So it's about making sure we also innovate a little bit, and we get those signals right.
I could add another specific example that I think Houston could really take the lead, and that's for all the financing that goes into CCUS projects, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, because that becomes really specific really quickly. There's also, as you guys know, a lot of tax credits, which are now going to be really amplified with the new administration, 45Q as an example. Financing of those projects, doing all the accounting for carbon storage in the reservoir. And this is, by the way, something that, only Houston knows, because we've been doing it for oil and gas, right? And this is the exact comparable. So I think that's one area that definitely all the private equity groups that are already here could, take the lead on.
You're on mute, Ernst.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point, Moji. There are historically a lot of deep balance sheets, both at corporates and funds here in Houston, and of course, matching that with engineering and execution talent is a great strength. Maybe final thoughts, since you hinted at it a bit there. Is there any relevance to your organizations or your investment outlook and energy transition execution outlook to this relatively new concept of Texas being kind of a swing state politically? All right. If no one wants to step in that one, then we'll maybe save that one for virtual drinks.
Oh, is that a trick question?
Just a tease. All right. Any closing remarks anybody'd like to offer?
Maybe just a quick comment. I think we're in the early innings of what is going to be a really long game, and I think Moji said it really well. You've got to be able to have that vision and be willing to participate and get out there and make things happen. And I think that there's a lot of those components that are going to contribute to the success of this kind of energy refresh more broadly as things have to take place. But I do think that the financing aspects of it have to come together. I think when you think about all of the investments that are going to need to be made, $1 billion SPAC is going to be a drop in the bucket. There's going to need to be a lot of resources that are brought to bear to make that work. And so I think it's a pretty exciting time. And I think we'll look back 10, 20 years from now and see this period as a really important inflection point.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. That's a great comment to wrap on. And again, many thanks to all of our great panelists here. I'm sure you can find each of us on social media or over email, whether you're a founder looking for funding or just an ecosystem partner wanting to connect. And a special thanks again to Houston Exponential and HX Ventures for getting us all together today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernst.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.